Hey there! You have found yourself back at the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I am Dr. Nerida, PhD equine nutritionist, horse lover, and avid supporter of solid nutrition science education in tertiary equine degrees, which is partly what makes this episode a little bit different and a really lovely one. I'm joined by Jess, an equine science student from Charles Sturt University who has been with me this week for work placement. We've been doing some seriously exciting behind-the-scenes work on My Happy Horse, including building out the US forage and product databases as we get ready for the USA version of the app. But because Jess also came armed with some excellent nutrition questions, we decided to turn a few of them into podcast episodes. In this first Q&A, we are talking about dental issues in horses and how they affect nutrition. Jess has a young horse with a very unusual dental condition, which opened up a much bigger conversation about how we feed horses when they can't chew normally, while forage still matters even when teeth are a problem, what to consider with soaked hay, and how to manage the tricky balance between dental health and overall nutrient intake. So this is a really practical episode for anyone caring for an older horse, or horse with missing or worn teeth, or any horse that needs a bit of nutritional creativity to keep them healthy, happy and well fed. So if you are ready, let's get into it. Jess, welcome to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so good to have you. And as a bit of background for everyone, Jess is a equine science student studying at Charles Sturt University.
Yep.
And she has been with me this week doing work placement. And we've been busily building the US database for the My Happy Horse app.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I've learnt a lot, which has been awesome.
Well, you've helped a lot, so it can be mind-numbing work building databases, but we actually have had fun. We've been playing around with various bits of technology to help us make it a lot easier, and yeah, we made like really good progress this week, which is exciting. So Jess, we are going to do a couple of Q&A sessions with you. I said to Jess, if there's any areas of nutrition you'd like to know more about, why don't we do a Q&A session and we'll record it and put it out as a podcast. So our first Q&A this morning together will be mostly around dental issues in horses and how that affects their nutrition.
Yes. So I have a Clyde cross at home who has just been to the vet, and he's had x-rays of his upper teeth done, and they have now found out that he has no cementum and no infundibulum in his top teeth. So his top teeth are essentially hollow. Now, given that and how horses chew consistently, how do we manage him, or how would we manage something like that nutritionally to make sure that he's still getting everything he needs without damaging his teeth further?
Yeah. So Jess told me about this, so I'm like, man, I've never heard of that. I've not fed a horse, but before we get into how to feed him, you've got an interesting background because you grew up in Sydney without horses.
I did. So the first kind of 20 years of my life, I lived in Sydney, and I started going to CSU as a distance education student, doing a base in animal science, wanting to study dogs actually, and got to CSU because it's a very heavy equine science program. I was kind of lumped in with all those subjects, and within that got to do a lot of practicals with horses. And you know what happens once you play with horses, you kind of never really go back from horses. So then transferred to being an equine science student, moved to the country, got a couple of horses, a couple of dogs, a couple of kids, back at it again, finishing the degree. And here we are.
Wow. I love that. And it must be, I mean, I was one of those really fortunate people that I was born just loving these creatures and grew up on a beef cattle property. So we had to use horses because there was no roads on our farm. And it was very mountainous, and that was really our only way around. But did you know as a kid that you loved horses? Did you draw them and read books about them? And yeah, right.
Yep.
And now you've got the thing, and there's no going back.
There's no going back.
Well, you're certainly a bright little mind when it comes to nutrition. So I'm looking forward to this chat. So your gorgeous Clyde cross, he's very beautiful. He's paint.
He's Clyde cross paint, and he's the most beautiful natured horse you will ever meet. He's the one who follows you around in the paddock. And just will come up and give you a cuddle.
And the vet said, so I'm not a vet. I'm very much a specialist nutritionist. So as far as all the technical vetty stuff with their teeth, I don't understand that. But the vets essentially told you that it looks like what's the squishy stuff in the middle of the teeth called?
The cementum.
The cementum. So it just appears to have never developed.
They have told me that this condition can develop in two ways. So either it decays from the inside or it was never there in the first place. And in his case, because all of his teeth are hollow, it looks like it was never there in the first place. So they're thinking something has happened during his development to cause this. They're not sure what, but now we have to manage it.
Because it does happen like when humans are in utero, there's certain things that can happen that will affect teeth. And I've actually got really good teeth. I don't have any fillings or like my teeth are healthy, but there's this and every time I go to the dentist want to dig at it to see what it is, but it's like coloration on the tops of my molars. And I've been told a number of times that would have happened in utero, like it was something to do with the way my teeth developed. So luckily for me, it's not. It's just a visual thing, and you can't see it because it's on my molars. But yeah, like I've sort of been aware of the fact that things can happen in utero. So he's looking at his X-rays. His back teeth are essentially like straws.
Essentially, yeah.
So they've got these holes, and what you were told by your vet was that the best thing is because you don't want food to be jammed up in there.
So
right?
Some of them, most of them still have the cap on them that essentially wears down when they eat hay, and the one that continuously erupts. So he's still got that in majority of his teeth, but there are 3 of them that are missing that cap. Not sure how it's come to be missing, but it is. And in those teeth, it's essentially hollow underneath. So it's just this massive hole that then fills up with food. And if there gets too much pressure, the teeth can fracture because they're not as strong, because they obviously don't have any of the supporting structures. So within that, we now have to clean out his mouth every day. We have been advised to graze him on fresh grass every day. However,
there's always a however.
There is always a however. He has had a bout of laminitis before, not with us. But within that, he can't graze, obviously, high sugar for a very long time because he is then prone to metabolic issues. So how do we manage both his teeth and his laminitis, or his predisposition to laminitis, in the best way possible?
Yeah, so it's always challenging, and these are the hardest puzzles in nutrition. I said to Jess yesterday, we were talking about him, and I said it's like when you get a horse with liver disease who benefits from having some sort of grain in the diet because you help the liver by giving it glucose and not making it produce glucose all the time. But they're also metabolic and you can't do that for them. So it does get really tricky. But I think with this guy, because he's had laminitis but doesn't currently have laminitis, and I think with him, because it's catch-22 situation. Like the thing that's best for his laminitis is worse for his teeth, and the thing that's best for his teeth is not good for his laminitis. But he is a good doer, which is on his side. And I said to Jess yesterday, maybe the best thing for him, because the pasture is so much better for his teeth, and that's going to give him less grief from that perspective, than perhaps using a muzzle for him, because he doesn't need a lot of pasture. Like if you just put him out on pasture all the time, he's going to blow up like a balloon, and he'll have obesity as well as metabolic conditions, as well as being much more prone to laminitis then. So potentially using a grazing muzzle in conjunction with really close monitoring for laminitis. So checking regularly for digital pulse. And I showed you the, what was it? Lamitag.
Lamitag.
Yeah.
So it's a cool little product.
Happened across this they'd commented on a post we'd made on our My Happy Horse Instagram page about a pony that had laminitis, and I saw him. I was there with him, and I was like, "Oh, we need to do something about you." And it's so quickly they can revert from being really sore to being much less sore when you change their diet and bring that sugar level down and get their insulin back under control. So, and there's Lamitag actually commented on that post saying, yeah, early detection is key, and it's a thing that you put around their leg and it will pick up the digital pulse for you. So it's probably way more sensitive than what our fingers can be, and it'll also give you like a reading so that you'll be able to see as seasons change, like, well, like the pasture is not great for him at the moment. We need to cut him back, and then you'll just have to deal with the fact that he has to have sort of safe hay for those periods of time. But at least if you can have him on pasture a lot of the time, muzzled, then he's not going to get this packing up of stuff in his teeth. Good job getting a horse with such a weird dental
I seem
condition.
to accumulate weird ones.
It's it's a tricky one, and when you said you had to clean his teeth every day, my brain just gave me an image of a giant toothbrush. But luckily, you can probably do it with a squirty hose and get it reasonably well
We're
cleaned
pretty
out.
lucky. He's been taking the hose pretty well. So he now swishes the water around in his mouth by himself,
Oh, does he?
which is good.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's very funny to watch, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then there's a few things with muzzles to watch. I had one of my horses was so intent on grazing through a muzzle that she actually started wearing her front teeth away, like down to the cementum. So she didn't get down to it. Luckily, we stopped her wearing one before she got there, but she like really wore her front teeth. It's all like worn out now. You can't see it anymore. But so just watch for that and make sure they do get time off every day to, access salt and to groom and to do those things. And you'll take his muzzle off to give him whatever supplementary feed he needs anyway. But yeah, I'd try that it's a little bit of a
see how you
I've got no
go.
experience with this,
Yeah.
but yeah, just to see how he goes maintaining his body weight and how his teeth go in that situation. And presumably if things go really wrong, they'll knock him out and take his teeth out, but that's going to be...
Well, they're going to have to put him completely under. So they did try to pull out his currently fractured tooth just under a minor sedation, standing with a normal dental procedure. And even after anaesthetic, 2 nerve blocks, morphine.
Oh, wow.
Even after all of that, he would throw his head when they went to go and touch the tooth. So the tooth didn't come out after all of that.
Yeah.
So
So dental fear is not just a human thing.
No, it is not. It is a horse thing
He
too.
just wanted happy gas.
Probably.
So, okay. So that's one dental condition, very uncommon. What other dental conditions have you got? What other questions have you got on this?
Oh, questions. Let's have a look-see. What are some of the most common dental issues that you see with horses that you treat or that you design diets for?
Yeah, I think there's 2. So the one that my mind goes to straight away when we talk about dental conditions in horses is your classic old horse that's worn its teeth down, essentially. So evolution is such a clever process, and I know that you know this, but a horse's teeth are constantly growing because their diet is so abrasive. So they're really high silica in a lot of grasses, and it just wears their teeth down. Unlike our diet, our diet's not very abrasive at all, and our teeth don't grow during our lifetime. But the horses have got, if you look at the X-rays like of your fella, and you can see like the big root in their jaw, and then that just keeps growing out over their lifetime. But you get to a point where they're so old that there's no tooth left to grow. They just run out of having extra tooth, and so they've got all that they're ever going to get, and then they get worn down, and then they just don't have any grinding surfaces, and you get in these situations like your boy shows it a little bit where there's that, you called it wave mouth yesterday, so they're not wearing evenly, and then you have to have teeth taken out. So you will get horses that get to the point where they just have no grinding surface left, so they can still graze, they can still shear with their front teeth and cut with their front teeth, but then it's just gummy up the back. So they can no longer grind anything long stem down to being fine enough for them to swallow. And then that's when you see horses that will actually quid. So they'll be grazing and chewing, and it looks like they're grazing and chewing normally, and then you just see them go on the ground, and there's this slobbery, grassy mess of stuff, and then they continue on. So I think there's a couple of things with those horses that is really important to keep in mind. Is one, they still have the same forage requirement that they had when they had teeth. And that's probably the single biggest thing I see people miss with horses that don't have teeth, is that they not forget, but maybe When you've got horses that are grazing, you actually don't realise how much forage they're eating every day. So it's probably particularly relevant for people who have always had horses on pasture, and then all of a sudden the horse can't graze anymore. And you don't realise that a 500 kilo horse is consuming, somewhere between 10 and 15 kilograms of dry matter a day. And so we'll supplement these horses, and people think, we're giving them a lot of extra supplementary feed. But when a horse has got no grinding surface, you have to feed them like 10 kilos of chaff a day. And that's a huge amount of chaff, like it's bucketfuls. And so that kind of gets missed a lot of the time, is that they just don't get the quantity of fibre that they need. So it becomes really important to look at, okay, what fibre sources can this horse eat without any back teeth to do any grinding, and how much am I actually giving it? And I weighed it out with some of the Queensland off the track videos. There's one about old horses, and I'll put the link to that video in the show notes for this podcast episode. But I actually weigh out what the forage requirement for a horse with no teeth would look like per day, and it was a huge amount of forage. We had hay cubes and hay pellets as well as chaff to make up that horse's forage intake, and it's a lot. So if you're not aware of how much forage a horse is eating every day, the tendency is to underfeed them, and then they lose a lot of weight because they're simply not getting enough calories in their diet because they're just not eating enough. The other really important thing to be aware of in that situation is, just because they can't eat pasture doesn't mean you shouldn't allow them to graze, because the grazing is actually really important psychologically. Like it's what they're meant to do. So if you take these horses that don't have teeth and physically stop them from grazing, it'll create psychological stress, and then that has flow-on effects for gut health and mental health, and you'll cause problems. And the other thing that chewing does is, even though they're not swallowing the fibre, they're creating saliva.
Yes.
And they'll still swallow their saliva. So that saliva is still really important for buffering their acid in their stomach. If you've got a horse that doesn't have any back teeth, you will start to meal feed them, because, we can't be there trickle feeding all day a horse with no teeth, and they will tend to eat in meals. But if you can still give them access to pasture, even though they're not going to swallow any of it or not very much of it,
to at least stimulate that grazing so that they've got the mental health benefits plus the saliva production, even if nothing goes down and gives them gut fill, really.
Yeah, it won't give them gut fill as such, but the saliva like physically buffers, like dilutes and buffers the acid. So instead of being like a pH of 1 or 2, if they've been standing around not chewing on anything, it'll still be like that 3 or 4. So even if it does splash up onto the top part of the stomach where it will burn holes, it's not as acidic. It's not as capable of burning. Yeah.
Yeah, or risky for ulcers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the mental health part of it is really important. Like we can get very focused on making sure that, they're getting the nutrition, and sometimes we forget that they're these animals that they're so wired to chew. They're so wired to go seeking food and to chew. So if you take that away from them, all of a sudden they're just standing around with nothing to do, and it does affect them. So the more that you can let them still behave normally, even though they have no teeth left, the happier they'll be, if nothing else.
Yeah. It's very interesting to think about. And we did have a horse staying with us a little while back who was a really bad windsucker. And he would actually start to bite poles, and he wore down his incisors.
Yeah, so this is that's the
other end of it.
Dental issue is that, so your back teeth are obviously for grinding, and then your front teeth are the cutting, shearing and cutting teeth. And there's a few things that can go wrong also with their front teeth. So windsucking is definitely one. Grazing like popcorn did really hard on her grazing muzzle and wearing her front teeth away, that could have been a disaster. And there's a condition that's really common in thoroughbreds that I haven't had a lot to do with, but I do know of a few horses that have had to have the surgery for it. I think it's called Eeyore. I was trying to think of the name of it earlier with Jess, and I'm like, something to do with donkeys.
Eeyore.
Yeah, it's an acronym, but I'm pretty sure it's Eeyore, and they sometimes have to have their front teeth removed so they can't graze. Well, certainly not tough forage. They wouldn't be able to graze effectively because they have no biting surface. And one of my horses has got issues with his front teeth because when he was a yearling, he stuck his mouth through just a normal farm gate and was just playing with it and then got a fright. And somehow he's got his teeth hooked and he's like literally just snapped his top jaw.
Oh my God.
So
horses.
So it was it was just he had it like screwed back together, and then he wasn't allowed to graze for 6 weeks while his bone healed. But you can see now as an adult that he's got like 2 of the teeth are malformed, and he does have a little bit of pain there because when my vet and dentist come and do their teeth, he'll fuss around with the gag, and Doug always says that fussing around is him just saying that doesn't feel good on my teeth, but he still can graze perfectly well and he's in really nice condition now. But he's one of my track horses because he gets too fat, so I'm not too worried about it. It's not affecting him. But for the horses that don't have operational front teeth, that's when, unless it's like really soft pasture that they can kind of pull with their gums or whatever they have left of their front teeth, then hay becomes really important for them because they can get hay in their mouth without having to chew it off, and they've still got all their grinding surfaces, so they can still grind. And it's interesting with the thoroughbreds with this Eeyore, they will do better when you take their teeth out because they don't have the pain anymore. So grazing for them is really painful, and then when they take their teeth out, pain goes away and you'll find that they do a lot better. So it sounds terrible. You think, how are they going to cope with no front teeth? But as long as you're giving them suitable forage sources that they can get into their mouth, then they're fine to chew it all up. Yeah, so they'd be the 2 most common that I see.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the difference between how you manage a missing shearing surface with how you manage a missing grinding surface.
Yes. Yeah, and the missing shearing surface is by far the easier one. So if you're going to lose any teeth, horses, lose your front teeth, not your back teeth.
That'd be great. Thanks. Yeah. How does soaking the hay affect the nutrient profile?
Yes, good question. So let me just ask first though, so we're talking about dental issues and then soaking hay. So for your horse, have they said soak the hay?
It was something that was mentioned in an attempt to make the hay softer.
Yeah, okay.
And so not when he chews, make the force not as intense on those teeth that are already weak.
Because he's at risk of shattering his teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And potentially, I guess, soaking to some extent, like for horses that are losing their grinding surfaces but haven't lost their grinding surfaces would be easy, just like pasture is easier for them to chew than what very dry hay is. I know Breeze, so I talk about Breeze a lot, but she's our old horse who she was, by Doug's estimation, in her mid-30s when we got her, and Doug told us we'd get about 6 months out of her because her joints are so bad. He thought something was just going to snap. That was nearly 5 years ago.
Wow.
So we still say she's in her mid-30s, but she must be nudging 40 by now. And she does really, really well on pasture and very, very little feed, like balance a pellet type, half kilo a day and a little bit of chaff. So her teeth are still good enough when the pasture is good, but I'm noticing now as our pasture, you can see our pasture is really dry, I'm having to give her just that little bit of extra feed to hold her weight because her grinding surfaces are not good enough to deal with this really hard grass. So yeah, potentially soaking hay. She still handles hay okay, like good loosened hay she still handles. But to your question, when you soak, you will soak some of the sugars out. So if you are soaking it, for your fella, because he's metabolic, that's not a bad thing.
Yep.
But if you had an old, let's say, thoroughbred who lost its grinding surfaces and you're struggling to maintain weight on the horse, soaking will soak the sugars out, which also takes a lot of the energy out. So you drop the calorie value essentially of that hay, and then you'll need to add that in somewhere else. So it's sort of you gain in some respects by giving them, if it works to soak and they can eat that hay again, then you're gaining the fibre, which is great, and you need that, but you will lose some of the calorie content. You'll lose a little bit of the protein content quality, the protein content, not the quality. and the electrolyte minerals will disappear as well. Not completely, but so your sodium, chloride, potassium will come out. And there's a little bit of other stuff that will soak out. But if you're conscious of it and you're balancing the diet, and in fact, one of the things that we do in My Happy Horse, so nutrition app, is we ask people if they soak their hay. And if the answer is yes, then the app will adjust the hay for what gets soaked out based on what we know from research. So it's obviously going to be an estimation, but it's better than not estimating at all and then, not meeting some of those requirements for the things that have disappeared in the hay. So it'd just be a matter of weighing up what do you gain, what do you lose, but I think for a majority of horses, if you can soak hay and they can still eat it, that's great. Because they're chewing, they're salivating, they're getting that mental stimulation of having to chew the long stem fibre, and if the soaking is enough to get around whatever dental issue they've got, that's good. I'd still do it and balance the diet up properly.
Yeah, well, it's important, like especially for us, with our horse, when we don't have access to long pasture. So, in the dead of winter when nothing's growing, because we're in an alpine region, so we get very cold, we get very frosty. So nothing grows, and if soaking the hay is going to give him then access to a nice softer forage, then that's our next best option, I guess.
Yep, and then you just balance the diet up, which is easy because a lot of the stuff that you lose, like potassium, for example, you lose a lot of potassium, but there's so much potassium to start with that it doesn't really matter, and you'll lose sodium and chloride, but that's just salt. So it's easy stuff to fix. Yeah, when you know what you have to fix. So I agree. I would feed him soaked hay.
Yeah, perfect.
Hey, just jumping in for a second. I hear so many stories of horse owners awake in the middle of the night researching what to feed that I seriously think we should start the 3 a.m. horse feeding club, where the horses are asleep, you're wide awake, and Google is absolutely not helping. If you're an eligible member, you already know the drill. The worry doesn't go away by reading more articles. It goes away when you have a clear, personalised plan for your horse that you actually trust. That's exactly what My Happy Horse gives you. A few taps and you'll know exactly what your horse needs and why. Check it out at myhappy.horse or on the App Store. Now, where were we?
What other adaptations or feed adaptations can we use for horses with dental issues?
Yep, good question. So the most important one by far is just making sure they're getting enough forage. So because that's the whole point of teeth, is to get forage into their mouth and then chew it up enough so that they can swallow it. So if there's something wrong with their teeth, there's something wrong somewhere with getting forage into them. So knowing what that is and adapting the diet for that is really important. So I said already, just, weighing the amount of chaff and hay pellets and hay cubes and whatever else you might be using to increase their forage intake is really important. But then, particularly with old horses, you can, and ones that you're having trouble keeping weight on, that's when I start to bring in the higher energy fibres. So things like beet, which soaks down and is really nice and soft. Copra, I love throwing in there. And horses tend to either really love copra meal and the occasional one won't like it. But I laugh with Breezy because Alay has copra meal in her diet and I have to put it in her feed. Otherwise she goes and steals Alay's feed. So she loves it. So it is a really nice, it's high in energy. It's got that nice fat content. It's got nice protein in it and it's just a nice fermentable fibre. Lupin hulls are another one, properly processed soybean hulls, all of those things that they're still fibre sources. So they're still supporting the hindgut, they're supporting microbial diversity, all of that good stuff that fibre diversity does, but they're also increasing your calorie content by quite a lot. So really handy for these old horses that will drop weight on you because they're not able to graze normally. And it's really, the dietary adaptation is really a horse by horse thing. Like, you've got a really good doer with dental issues, so you still have to restrict his forage intake and also manage his dental issues. A lot of people have got horses that are quite thin because they're not able to chew properly. The overarching thing that is important is that they're fed a balanced diet. In manipulating things around and having to use different forage sources, and they can't graze anymore. Oftentimes they sometimes can't eat hay if they don't have their grinding surfaces. So making sure that we feed them stuff that they can chew with their gums and swallow, but there is still a balanced diet. So, and this is why we have My Happy Horse, because you can put everything in there and just sanity check a diet and make sure that you are giving them everything that you need. Because even for me, like, my head is like a human horse nutrition calculator. So most of the time with a lot of diets, I can go, oh yeah, that, and that, and we're done. And in fact, some of my horses are not even in My Happy Horse because I've been doing their diets for so many years that I know what they should be fed. But the ones with dental issues, they always go in, because even I'm not sure when I start messing around so much with the forage part of their diet what I need to be putting in there to balance their diet up.
Yeah. And it's a very cool feature to be able to see just in the bars in the bottom of My Happy Horse, all of the macronutrients and the micronutrients and all of that stuff. And, when you've got a red value.
Yes. Yeah, when something's too low. And it is like a lot of horses. Yours is an exception in having serious dental issues so young. But a lot of these horses that have got dental issues are older, and when they get older, you don't want to give their immune system any reason not to work. So if, for example, you're not meeting zinc requirement, which is really easy to do all around the world because forages are very low in zinc and can be extremely low. Some of the pastures that I've tested in hays over the years have been as low as 9 parts per million in zinc, and a minimum requirement is 40. So if you're you could be doing a really good job of making sure that a horse is getting enough forage and enough fibre. But if you miss that bit and then they get a virus in winter, it's really going to knock them for six, because they're not going to be able to mount a proper immune response. So, and it's such a simple thing to fix. But if you don't know that it's there in the first place, you can't fix it.
Fix it.
Yeah.
And you just touched on this, but what are some of your favourite ways to support dental health with nutrition and diet?
I always go back to, it's becoming my thing, I think, but I always go back to evolution. And I think the single biggest thing that we can do for horses for their teeth is make sure that their diet is forage-based. Because as soon as we move away from forage-based diets for any horse in any situation, we create problems, and problems with the teeth is one of them. So I was just telling this story last week in some sales team training with a feed company, and it was actually a stud that was a client of theirs and had been for a long, long time, and they were feeding way too much concentrate feed, despite being told not to feed that much. So I was feeding way too much, and then all their yearlings were coming up with all these weird dental issues. So the vet who was their dentist, their dental vet, was looking at their teeth wearing patterns and going, what is going on here? And is often the case, like the first thing they look at is, well, it must be the feed causing the problem. And they were right. It was the feed causing the problem, but it wasn't the feed causing the problem. It was the way that they were feeding it. So these youngsters were being fed like 4 or 5 kilos more a day of this concentrated feed, and then very little hay. So what was happening is that concentrated feed is so hard, so easy to chew. They don't get this wearing of their teeth. And then their teeth are still growing at the same rate they would be, because nothing says to evolution, oh, these horses are eating this, very easy to chew concentrate feed, maybe you should slow the teeth growth down. It doesn't work like that. The teeth still grow because evolution has learnt to expect that they will wear down at this rate. And they weren't wearing their teeth down because they weren't chewing enough forage. And the chew pattern is different. I convinced them to go back to a much more forage-based diet, and that was the end of that issue. It just stopped. So they stayed on the same feed. It wasn't the feed. It was just the amount they were giving every day. And it was a really, sometimes, we know this stuff intellectually, but sometimes you get these really dramatic demonstrations of what happens when you push something too far. And that was one of those really dramatic demonstrations. And it was like horse after horse after horse had this same wear pattern in their teeth. So I think if I had to pick one thing with dental health, it would be just make sure the diet's forage based, like 2% of body weight minimum for a majority of horses. I don't care how high performance they are, they need to have lots and lots and lots of forage. And then the other thing that I think is interesting, and it ties in with so much other stuff, is just forage variety is important as well. So I know you know the research that was done over in Western Australia where oaten hay or cereal hay is really common, and those hays typically are really high in water-soluble carbohydrate. And what they were finding, and it's beautiful research, and I will find it. I can't for the life of me think of the name. Can you remember the name of the researcher? I will find the papers and put the links to them in the show notes, but for anyone who's interested. But what they were finding is that horses that were just on cereal hay were actually getting dental caries in their teeth, like getting holes in their teeth, because the sugars were causing fermentation and actually literally eating their teeth away. And one of the findings was that when you either changed them to a different hay source or fed different hays, then the problem wasn't as big or it wasn't there at all. And, you know, we talk about forage variety a lot from the perspective of the gut and the gut microbiome and making sure that you've got a lot of fibre diversity so that you create microbial diversity, and then that has all of these massive health effects for the horse. But for their teeth too, it's really important. So different fibres and also feeding it in as natural a way as possible. So having horses' heads down is your best wear pattern, as opposed to, you know, constantly eating from hay feeders. Hay feeders do my head in when I say that, and I can see one out in my paddock with straw in it. But for horses that are in stables and they're eating like giraffes all the time, because they're not meant to chew with their head up in that position.
Well, I've also heard through lecturers that having the head down for majority of the day also helps with mucosal clearance. Mm-hmm. So clearing everything out of the sinus.
Clearing everything out of their lungs more than their sinus.
As well, yeah.
So their head needs to be lower than their chest to clear their lungs. And this is why they get travel sickness. So when they travel for long periods of time and their head's up, they can't drain the muck that ends up down in their lungs, and then they get an infection and they get travel sickness. But they have to have their head down. And I was reading a post from Ben Sykes a couple of weeks ago too, and he mentioned, and I've heard it said a number of times, and I did track down the research at one point. And again, I'm terrible at remembering papers, but they produce more saliva when their head's down as well. So again, evolution. It's this thing. But when you think about it, I say it so many times, but it's such an important thing to stress, like 55 million years of evolution. And we've been, like, they've been on the earth 99.99% of their time without us in their lives. So, you know, the more we can learn to manage horses in a way that mimics the way they evolved, the better the welfare, the better the performance, the better the health, and they really are just happier horses when they're managed like that.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
It's and it's not. It can take some creativity to do it, but ultimately it's not hard to manage them that way. And again, the biggest thing we can do is just make sure that they've got lots of forage and forage access all the time. It's good for their teeth, and it's good for their gut.
And my last question, is there any nutritional way that we can bolster the health of the teeth?
I was actually reading through Jess's questions, and I'm like, I don't think anyone has ever asked me that question before, but I went to it from a very human perspective, you know, like thinking about how do we not have white shiny teeth for horses, but, you know, actually improving the quality of the tooth. But I think when I sort of zoomed myself back out and thought about it more broadly, it's the same answer. It's forage-based diet, being aware of how much water-soluble carbohydrates in the forage, and not making sure that they're not eating really sugary hays all the time, because, you know, we know what happens to our teeth if you're drinking sugary drinks all the time and not brushing your teeth and things. And I guess the other thing that is important as well, and I couldn't tell you exactly why, other than it's important for every metabolic process, every structure in the body, is making sure that you're feeding a balanced diet. So, you know, making sure that calcium requirements are met. Actually, that is a really important one that we haven't brought up. Is the other dental issue that I will see is horses on high oxalate grasses, and then they get the commonly called big head disease, but the nutritional secondary hyperparathyroidism. It's a crazy big long name. And it's where the grasses will essentially cause the body to leach the bones of calcium because they steal calcium from the horse. And when that gets really bad, they'll lose so much calcium out of their jaw bones that they'll start to have dental issues because their teeth are bumping around in a jaw that's no longer properly calcified. That is an important one. So and it comes down to feeding a balanced diet. So, making sure that you know that you're on high oxalate grasses, which is, again, My Happy Horse will pick you up on that. It'll make sure that you put all of those grasses in, and it will adjust the horse's calcium requirements so that you are getting enough calcium. But there's probably a bunch of other nutrients that are actually important for maintaining the health of the teeth. And I think as long as you're covering your bases and making sure that diet's balanced, then your teeth should be nice and healthy.
Well, excellent. So
there you go. Got your teeth into your first podcast there, Jess. That was really good. I think I haven't spoken a lot about dental issues in horses, so that was good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure. And we'll thanks for all your help again this week.
No,
and
again, thanks for having me.
Catch you in another episode.
All right, thank you.
If you'd like to know more about the My Happy Horse virtual equine nutritionist, you can head on over to myhappy.horse. And also, while you're there, check out the Dr. Nerida AI, which is me in AI format. And that version of me is happy to answer your questions about horse nutrition 24/7. Thanks again, and we'll catch you soon.